So it would seem that the strength training principle of progressive overload and the debate over how much or if you can apply that into the Pilates space has become a bit of a thing. So wanted to offer something of a tutorial and a way for you to realize just how much nuance goes into that when it comes to the Pilates modality specifically, especially when factoring in the complexities of the apparatus itself. So what I'm going to take is a simple plank and use that as an example. So question A is, what is a plank? A plank is an endurance body weight exercise. You're holding yourself up in relation to gravity. So question A, when it comes to progressive overload, is what exactly are you trying to progress? Because what it basically means is that you're manipulating certain training variables in order to get either a position or a muscle group stronger and more stress adapted over time. So the first idea that we need to realize is that you can't just progressively overload a thing if there isn't a benchmark in relation to something else, the person specifically, and what exactly inside of that position are you trying to get stronger or harder or progress down the line. It isn't sort of a generalized term where you can go, I'm going to progressively overload this plank in a room full of people. What does that even mean when one person could maybe only hold it for 10 seconds and another person can hold it for 5 minutes? How are you going to apply these techniques? And first and foremost is, what exactly am I trying to get progressed for a certain person in a certain position? So I'm just going to assume a plank position on the ground where my hands are directly under my shoulders. So I have a certain support position, and if I wanted to progress how hard the actual plank is to hold for a certain duration of time, well, I could increase knowing the ideas behind moment arms, that I can move my arms, my hands, my feet more distal from each other, because now I've lost advantage in holding my body weight in that shape. I now inherently feel heavier because my hands are not underneath my shoulders. Now it might be harder to hold, right? Unfortunately, because these are multiple pivot point actions, I also have the fact that now my arms are further forward, which is introducing my arms in greater shoulder flexion. So perhaps it's not even that much harder for me as a person to hold the plank from this distance, but maybe it is harder on my shoulders because I don't necessarily have as much shoulder flexion strength or mobility. And maybe that's my greatest limiter. So even just in a regular plank on the floor, you have to ask yourself multiple questions in like, well, I wanted to make it harder for them to hold themselves up, but I don't know that it was actually necessarily that much harder, but it introduced a shoulder issue, okay? Now, if we're coming up onto the reformer itself, what I want you to think of first is that we are always higher than our feet. Now, anytime that we take a shape like a body weight position and we bring our upper body higher than our feet, we've already regressed how much we weigh in order to hold up. So even just taking a plank and putting it onto the reformer where you are now at an incline is slightly less stressful than a plank on the ground where your hands and feet level. So now we have the spring thing. The spring thing being, if I'm going to hold myself up, how much spring do I have here versus how much spring do I have way back here? Well, the distance is going to increase the spring weight, which now that my hands and my feet are more distal, just like they were on the floor, the plank might feel harder because it's further away, but the spring has also stretched. So it's still not as hard as if I was doing it on the ground. But it does reintroduce the shoulder flexion action because now my arms are back out in front of me, albeit not as stressful because they are still below me. But depending on the spring weight that I've added, it might be more of a shoulder press than it is even a plank. I only had like one medium spring on, so if I had added 2 of them and popped myself up, at a relatively small shaped human being, me trying to press any amount of springs out in a multiple capacity is now a ridiculously easy plank, but my shoulders are definitely working harder. And now I'm still making a decision. Now, if I were to go down into a lighter spring and make it so that I can take the spring and move my feet further and further away without as much shoulder, now I can definitely feel like, okay, that's hard for me. But because the spring returns us back in, we're not even moving from inertia like we would be on the floor. So because there's a constant back and forth, the endurance isolated isometric, that essentially is a plank, like how long can you do this thing and not stop until you can't do this thing anymore, doesn't really happen because there's always motion. So rarely have I ever seen, I do it to people, but rarely have I ever seen people be like, okay, find your edge, don't move, right? That would be what we would do on the ground if we were in a plank. If you're actually using it as an enduring isometric, you're taking yourself to the edge of where it's hardest to be in that posture, and don't move. Don't move until when? Now we're back to progressive overload. So if we're recognizing that, we wanted the plank to be the enduring isometric that it is, position that person's body in the furthest maybe stretch possible. I'm just using this as one training variable example. And we've found that where it's not so hard on their shoulders, it's a shoulder exercise, but they are far enough away to feel how it's hard. Now we have to decide how long they can be there. And then we're truly progressing that one aspect of the plank. That's going to be a personal thing. Now, in addition to that, what would that look like? Well, what it wouldn't look like is what it often looks like in Pilates, is that we're usually kind of going back to the back and forth thing, having people do things where it still looks really held together the whole time. And we're either giving them repetitions or giving them a certain amount of time that they're doing it. And we're stopping it generally before that person hits their edge. But if we're progressively overloading literally anything, it has to get to a point where they can't do it anymore. And everything is starting to sort of fall apart. If we aren't getting there, then common sense would say we're not really stressing their threshold on anything. They already can do it that long. It's gotta look worse. This goes with everything, right? It's gotta look worse at the end than it does at the beginning. And this is a big flip in how Pilates teachers are trained. Not only are we always looking for it to look perfect, but we're like trying to better every repetition thereafter. Now, that's not saying that in strength training you're not working on technique, but it's a flip to understand that if you are truly working at your hardest capacity and progressive overload is with you in whatever nuance you're biasing in every single position or muscle group, then when you get to the end of that set, it ain't gonna look as cute. It's not gonna move as well. And things are gonna start to get to a point where they're like, I can't do this anymore the way that you wanted me to. In order to be a Pilates teacher who's trying to bridge the gap into thinking that every one of these positions that I do, maybe with my clients, I want to progressively overload an aspect, you have to get yourself over the hump of thinking that it's always going to be great. So if I'm going to be like working with this client and they really want to get their planks stronger and they want to be able to hold them longer, then let's pretend for a second that this is my stretch limit. And let's do like a time clock and act like it's been 45 seconds. And now I'm starting to, I'm making this up, but now I'm starting to shake. Or maybe you start to see my pelvis position struggle. And you're cueing me back into that neutral and my knees are starting to buckle. We're finding their edge and we're getting to a point where they don't injure themselves, but everything is really working hard against those forces in that exact thing. I have no idea how long I've been talking, but this is just one example of how you cannot answer. Pilates can progressively overload in 30 seconds. Because it's nuanced to the thing, to the person, to the goal, and then on top of that, actually understanding the complexities of the support system and the assistance that comes inherent to the springs. It's not gravity. And that is ultimately why it's so different from strength training. It is not real world. It's always helping you on one side of the exercise. So, wrapping it up, there's just so much chatter going on right now in the industry, especially online, with what Pilates can and can't be when it comes to strength. And it's really important to know who you're listening to and do they really understand these concepts, or they might just be confusing you more. So please feel free to reach out with any thoughts on that. And I have full plans on coming back to you with much, much more